Elizabeth, my eldest son's wife, nodded in agreement with the other's words, a gesture that made my heart sink. The realization that they despised me was crushing. What had I done to warrant such disdain? Hadn't I simply been fulfilling my role as a mother and mother-in-law? Where had I gone astray? Why was there so much animosity directed at me? Being told I couldn't attend their wedding felt like a stark indication of how serious the situation was, but I couldn't think of anything I might have done to deserve this. My husband is equally perplexed. It's beyond comprehension, after all the love and effort we've put into raising our children, to be treated this way. The disrespect from our son is unimaginable. I need to make them understand the pain of neglecting a mother. They will face the consequences of their actions. My name is Helen, and I am a 55-year-old homemaker. We have 2 sons. Our eldest, Michael, is a successful professional in the city, earning a significant salary as an elite. Our younger son, David, is quieter and prefers more delicate tasks, so he works at a local manufacturing factory. Although the boys used to get along well in their younger years, their relationship changed drastically as they grew older. Michael began to harbor a deep-seated resentment toward David, belittling him in front of us and even bullying him at school. Despite our repeated efforts to correct Michael's behavior, his attitude toward David remained unchanged. Now, with Michael's upcoming marriage, we received a message from him that his fiancée, Elizabeth, who works at the same company as he does, wanted to meet us. Michael had arranged a dinner for us to get acquainted with her. This news brought us some relief as we saw it as a chance to finally see our son off properly. Although Michael insisted that David should not attend, David himself was indifferent, saying, "It's easier for me that way." So my husband and I decided to get him a souvenir on our way back. When the day of the dinner arrived, we were led to an upscale restaurant where a private room had been reserved. As we entered the room, we found Michael and Elizabeth already seated, with Elizabeth exuding a strong presence. "You're late, Mom and Dad," Michael remarked. "Sorry, dear, we got a bit lost in this unfamiliar area," I said, trying to smooth over the situation. "Don't embarrass me too much," Michael replied, his tone sharp. Though his harsh words stung, I tried to brush them off, knowing this was typical of him. We settled into our seats and began to enjoy a truly extravagant meal, all the while overhearing the conversation between Michael and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, always attentive, seemed to anticipate every detail of our future plans. Michael couldn't stop singing her praises. "Elizabeth is remarkable," he said. "She's so organized and driven. If someone like her had been by my side earlier, I could have accomplished so much more. Elizabeth is a perfectionist, far superior to anyone else." Elizabeth, sitting next to him, looked pleased and interjected with a smile, "Michael, you're exaggerating." Michael seemed utterly infatuated with Elizabeth, his admiration for her, and himself, overflowing. "I'd love to hear more about how you 2 met and what brought you together," I suggested, hoping for some insight, but Michael dismissed my request with a curt, "Instead of focusing on a boring story, I'd rather you appreciate Elizabeth's qualities." The entire dinner felt more like a sales pitch for Elizabeth than a genuine meeting, which made us uncomfortable. My husband also appeared uneasy, and I was relieved we hadn't brought David along. Michael continued, "I've mentioned this before, but Elizabeth is on a whole different level from you. Make sure you treat her well once we're married." "We would never dream of mistreating anyone," we replied. "You say that now," Michael retorted, "but you always favored David and barely acknowledged me. I can't trust that you will do the same with Elizabeth." Michael's words left us stunned. Despite his accusations, our focus on David had stemmed from Michael's relentless bullying. David had struggled with Michael's harassment since childhood, and as parents, it was only natural for us to try to ease David's distress. Even when we confronted Michael about his behavior, he merely shrugged and said, "I just don't like David," never addressing the real issue. To label our support for David as favoritism was profoundly unfair. Not wanting to escalate the situation further, we refrained from responding to Michael's harsh words. The meeting concluded uneasily, with no resolution to our concerns. Michael, taking a matter into his own hands, declared, "You're getting older, so we'll take care of you. Don't worry about it." He had decided that they would move in with us after the marriage, without consulting us first. Elizabeth seemed to echo Michael's sentiments, provocatively saying, "You have a son who hasn't become independent yet? I guess it's up to me to set him straight." Instead of feeling reassured, her comment made me uneasy. David lives with us, but he contributes actively and is not merely dependent on us. Nevertheless, Michael and Elizabeth moved in as if they were the rightful owners, claiming rooms and acting like they ruled the house. One day, Michael ordered, "David, go weed the garden now. It's a task suited for someone like you." David replied, "Sorry, but I have work." Michael insisted, "You have the day off, don't you? Handle it yourself." David's face flushed with anger. "What did you say? That's incredibly disrespectful." Michael's harassment of David grew more relentless, and though I found David's composed responses amusing, the situation was far more troubling than it appeared. It became clear one night, as everyone else was asleep, that Michael and Elizabeth were scheming to drive David and us out of our own home. I had gone to the kitchen for some water when I noticed the living room light was still on. I quietly approached and overheard Michael and Elizabeth's conversation. "When will this house finally be ours?" "Just a little longer. We need to ensure those nuisances don't come back. Once we get rid of them, I want to renovate. This place is really outdated." Michael laughed in agreement with Elizabeth, saying, "Exactly." I was stunned by their apparent plotting. I quickly consulted with my husband and David, realizing we needed to act fast to prevent the situation from worsening. In the midst of our panic, David spoke up, "Mom, let me handle this. I have a solid plan." David's confidence was reassuring, though his plan required some patience. If everything went according to the strategy, we could teach Michael and Elizabeth a lesson and reclaim our home. We decided to trust David's plan and move forward with it. Despite the ongoing issues, life continued, and Michael's wedding date was set. They chose a charming venue nearby. Although I had initially considered a countryside location, the venue they selected was lovely. "It's a bit pricey, but we can easily manage," Michael said with a chuckle, which irritated me, but I chose to remain silent. Michael and Elizabeth's antagonism toward David persisted, but David's mature handling of the situation kept it from being too distressing. As the wedding day approached, we were summoned by Michael and Elizabeth. Curious about the reason, David, my husband, and I went to meet them, only to be stunned by their announcement. "We don't want you to attend our wedding. If you do, we'll cut ties," they declared. I was taken aback, but I tried to stay composed and asked Michael, "Are you serious? Why are you telling us this now?" Elizabeth responded, feigning tears, "I'm just terrified of you all. I can't bear the thought of having such people at my wedding," which only intensified my discomfort. Michael added, "As I said, if you don't like it, we'll cut ties." That would be a problem, wouldn't it? After all, I'm the pride and joy of this family, unlike that worthless brother, gestured towards David. David seemed at a loss for words, and witnessing this, I finally reached my breaking point. "Michael, that's enough. You've always looked down on David," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Why do you treat him this way? He's your brother. Stop mistreating him," I demanded. Michael and Elizabeth's hostility quickly shifted toward me. "You're just as bad," Elizabeth snapped. "You've been deceived by his meek demeanor and spoiled him. This is sibling favoritism. It's always been terrible living here." "That's because you've constantly bullied David," I countered. "That's just an excuse," Michael retorted. "You simply couldn't resist favoring David, could you?" No matter how many times I said no, Michael refused to listen, and we couldn't have a rational conversation. Why won't he hear me out, especially when all of this stems from his own actions? Why can't he reflect on his behavior? Despite everything, Michael is still my son, and I always thought I had to support him properly. But now, I've reached my limit. In that moment, I decided to let go. "Fine, we won't attend your wedding," I declared, indifferent to the consequences. David and my husband were taken aback by my response, but Michael and Elizabeth seemed quite pleased. "Are you sure about this? You might end up regretting it," Michael asked, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Regret? There's no way a wedding would be perfect with nuisances like you there," I said, a hint of finality in my tone. Michael and Elizabeth laughed, but we felt a sense of relief. There was no need to attend their wedding and subject ourselves to further unpleasantness. In the end, our family decided to skip the wedding. We hadn't even received invitations, so going to the venue would have been pointless. Michael seemed pleased, but he was unaware of the implications of our decision. Reflecting on David's plan made me smile. After Michael and Elizabeth's wedding went off without a hitch, they continued to stay in our house as initially planned. Their workplace was moving closer, making them busier than ever. Once their job transfers were complete and they had their first day at work, they returned home in a state of panic and called for David. "David, what's going on here?" they demanded, confronting him for answers. When I asked what happened, they recounted the story briefly. On their first day at work, while being shown around, they unexpectedly encountered David, who was their guide. A senior manager named Tyler noticed David, greeted him warmly, and informed them that David was the president of a major client company. This revelation stunned them, as they had initially thought of David as just a factory worker. In reality, David had been working diligently at the factory since he was hired, earning recognition from President Johnson, who ran the operation. David's innovative ideas were crucial to the factory's success, and he quickly gained respect from his colleagues. Thanks to his contributions, the factory's performance improved significantly, making it a preferred partner for many companies. When President Johnson fell ill, David took it upon himself to visit him on his days off, demonstrating his deep commitment to both the factory and its people. Impressed by David's dedication, President Johnson appointed him as his successor. Despite David's initial modesty and reluctance, "I couldn't possibly take on this role," President Johnson was resolute. With the backing of his colleagues, David took on the role of president. Under his leadership, the factory's performance continued to thrive, and David, already popular among the employees, earned even more trust and respect in his new role. The factory grew into a nationally recognized enterprise, and David's name became well known even among major companies in the city. Today, David was simply visiting the company for a client discussion, nothing more. Michael and Elizabeth, taken aback by David's elevated position, were clearly displeased with the respect he commanded. "There must be some trickery involved. You've always been like that," Michael muttered. Michael then erupted at David. "If you had told us about this, we wouldn't have acted the way we did. Why didn't you say anything?" Elizabeth, overwhelmed, broke down in tears. Their reaction seemed absurd. David responded calmly, "I achieved this position through my own efforts. It's really that simple. So why are you so upset?" David's nonchalant demeanor and innocent expression only seemed to enrage Michael further, who shouted, "Don't get cocky." David addressed Michael calmly. "More importantly, there's something crucial I need to discuss with you." With some effort, my husband and I managed to calm Michael and Elizabeth down and had them sit. David went to his room and returned with a set of photos, which he spread out on the table. "First, take a look at these," David said, placing several photos in front of them. The images showed Elizabeth with a flamboyantly dressed man, clearly evidence of her infidelity. Michael's reaction was immediate. He began to thrash around, shouting, "This can't be true." Elizabeth, visibly shaken, began to tremble as she faced the evidence. "Since she was to become my sister-in-law, I had thought it wise to do a background check, and this is what it revealed." With such clear proof, there was no denying the truth. Confronted by David, Elizabeth had no choice but to apologize immediately. "I'm sorry," she said. Michael, in shock, could barely process what was happening. "This is what happens when you don't look beyond the surface. Nobody's perfect," David remarked, his smirk causing us to stifle a chuckle. Overwhelmed by despair, Michael sank to his knees while Elizabeth's insincere apologies echoed through the room. Eventually, Michael and Elizabeth divorced, an outcome that seemed inevitable given Michael's unforgiving nature. After the affair, Elizabeth was anxious about the alimony demands, but her parents covered her financial obligations. Despite this, Michael's emotional wounds remained unhealed. The shock of the divorce led him to leave his job, and since then, he has isolated himself in his room, emerging only to eat and barely interacting with anyone. Whenever David was around, Michael would react with a fearful "he" and quickly retreat. It seemed that the incident had left Michael with a deep-seated fear of David. The family held several discussions about how to handle Michael's situation. In the end, it was agreed that we would sever ties with him. While this decision will undoubtedly impact Michael deeply, our patience has worn thin, and we find it hard to forgive his selfishness after everything that has happened. A few months later, Michael was forced to leave the house. Despite his desperate pleas and tears, begging for forgiveness, we could no longer consider him part of the family. His response, though heart-wrenching, felt justified given the circumstances. Meanwhile, the three of us are enjoying a more peaceful life without any disturbances. Even though my husband is retired, we live comfortably, thanks to David's continued support. We are deeply grateful for our thoughtful and devoted son, David. Moving forward, we are committed to being a loving family for him for as long as we can. It looks like David is set to marry soon. His partner is a colleague from the same company with whom he has been in a relationship for several years. We are eagerly looking forward to our beloved son's wedding and the joy it will bring.